So I kind of put into action what I've been talking about in the last few videos, particularly on how to make your own TTRPG. I have now made my own, and this video is how I did it. Hello and welcome to the special edition of How to Be a Great GM. My name is Guy, and today I'm going to be, well, indulging myself a little bit, but also hopefully helping to motivate, inspire, and to drive you to making your own TTRPG. Now, the very first question that you have to ask is why? Why would you do this? What is the motivator behind doing it? And this is not new. I've mentioned this before in the previous video. Why would you make a TTRPG? You have to answer that question truthfully and honestly, and that has to become your guiding principle. So in my case, I made this TTRPG because my boyfriend asked me to. I was instructed to create a game that had no mathematics, no dice, and basically was super easy to play without having to learn a pile of rules. I was skeptical, as I think the video that I released shows. After a while, though, I started to think, what would that system be like? This yes, no, yes you succeed, or no you fail. Because that ultimately is something that I think of when I think of a yes-no system. It either succeeds or it doesn't. There are no maths. There is no greater success or lesser success. There's no compromising. There's no comparability either. You can't compare, is one yes better than another yes? So it whittles it down. It really, really narrows it down to pretty much you succeed or you don't succeed. That's all good and well, but there has to be tension and there has to be decision making. And tension usually comes from our dice. Usually that random generator, that thing that we roll, will we get the number that we need to succeed or fail? That's a metagame tension, which I've again spoken about on the channel before. But how do you get that tension into a game where it's just yes or no? Yes, I can do it. No, I can't do it. There's no tension in there. So I needed to factor in how to bring tension into your game. And if your role-playing system doesn't have a way of instilling tension, both in-game but also meta-game, then I think you're missing a trick. The decision-making process is another one. A very wise friend of mine has said to me many, many times before, the amount of decisions that you as the player have to make is almost directly proportional to the enjoyment that the character or the player or the person will have when playing your game. This is true for all games, whether it's a board game or role-playing. So the more decisions your character is forced to make, the more decisions your player is forced to make during a game, the more enjoyment they have. Up to a point. Beyond a certain point, it's too many decisions, and that's when it sort of falls over. So we've seen role-playing systems evolve over the last 30 years from something where there are lots of reference tables, there's lots of factors that have to weigh into your decision-making process. We've seen them progressively getting simpler and simpler and simpler. Some of them. Others have remained in that complex state because there are different target market audiences out there. So the decision-making process is absolutely critical to your design of your game, but it's also critical to understand how many decisions your players want to make during a game. I'm getting myself confused here because usually we try not to talk about the player, we talk about the PC, the character. But when you're designing a role-playing game, you're designing it for the player, not for the PC. The PC doesn't exist yet because you haven't written the rules on how they could exist. Anyway, you get my point. All right. So once I decided that this game was going to be effectively either a yes or a no, I needed a mechanic that was going to allow me to create tension and decision-making moments. The only option that I had was then to turn and say, okay, well, in order to create some kind of tension, there needs to be a limit. Can you do this or can't you do it? There is a very hard limit. But that doesn't really limit you in terms of your decisions. You can always think of rephrasing a question so that it's a yes or it's a no answer. How do we create tension? I then went and said, okay, well, I need a list of skills. If your character has these skills and you want to say, yes, you can, then that's fine. If your character doesn't have skills, it doesn't have the skill that you're trying to do, then the answer is automatically, no, you can't do it. So this has worked on the amount of decisions that the player character has to now make, or the player has to now make. I'm going to mix this up throughout the entire video, so you just have to forgive me, right? So by giving a list of skills, you are confining the decision-making process of the player. You're giving them a playing field, saying, okay, well, these are the things you can choose from. Now you have to choose which is the right one to use at the right moment. So that's a decision process. And you also have to have the skill in order to be able to use it. That creates tension. So in one of the trial games that I was running on my other YouTube channel, that's youtube.com/greatgmlive, I had a series of players who were going through the system, and they had chosen the skills that they felt were appropriate for their characters. And then they got into a situation where someone needed to fire the weaponry on the Starship. And they realized that nobody had that skill. So the tension suddenly shot through the roof. They're like, but we can do anything, but we can't do something that we can't do. And we can't fire weapons. What are we going to do? So then they had to try and figure out, okay, we're going to try and talk to these people. We're going to try and persuade the enemy. We're going to try and do this. We're going to try and hide the Starship. We're going to try and avoid. It just created the perfect narrative moment because there was tension. There was decision-making. There was lots of decision-making going on. And the players were forced to not just resort to, I hit it, I kill it. That for me was a moment that was perfect. And there's another way to say it. I don't want to sound arrogant, but that was a moment where it was like, this system works. They have the capacity to say yes or no to anything. And now they are stuck because of decisions that they made earlier on. Will they learn from those decisions when their character advances in level, if that's a system that's in place? Yes or no? Well, we'll find out when they level up. But it created a point of tension. So I liked that. I also then had to make sure that the skill list that I gave was broad enough to cover most eventualities in terms of what characters might try to do. And there are many that I have left off. When you are designing your system, you will find that you go, okay, well, I want to boil down everything into 3 statistics or into 3 attributes or into 3 values or into 50 values and 50 attributes and 50 skills. You will always come into a situation where that skill just isn't on the list. So I can tell you right now, I don't have cooking on my list, but I do have craft, which I don't think is right for cooking, because cooking is an art, in my opinion. I can't do it, by the way. So I'm always in awe of people who can. But there are things that you're going to miss out. That's life. And you have to acknowledge that and then release a 2nd edition later on once your fans have sent to you, hey, you're missing this, you're missing this, you're missing this. The key is to not miss the fundamentals. I realized, though, that just being able to have all of these skills and to be able to do them or not to do them was not really a great way in terms of building a long-lasting decision-making / tension process. Because there was no random mechanic involved, there was nothing that was going to determine the outcome outside of the PCs. The players were going to be completely responsible for their own narrative. I also needed a way that there was danger. So you have tension, you have decision-making, and then you need danger, life and death. You need some kind of risk. So the first iterations of this game, and it has now gone through 3 major iteration revamps, okay? The 3rd iteration is obviously where it's at now and where it's pretty much done as far as I'm concerned. The first one had, I don't want to say a complicated system because I was sticking to my mantra. I was constantly going back saying, no, way too complicated, way too complicated. The first system, you were either alive or you were unconscious. So combat was really, really, really straightforward, but also very final. And I didn't like that. But I couldn't have gray areas, or at least I didn't think I could have gray areas. Until I realized that the biggest way of creating tension and skill use, but also tension in combat, where I can't compare, I can't say you hit or no, you miss or this or that. I tried various permutations, by the way. They didn't really work out so well. So I kept at it, and I realized that if the player character has a pool, we call them action points. They're not life points, they're not mana points, they're not stamina points, they're action points. It's the number of actions that the character can do in a given 24-hour period. That then induces the player to have to keep track of the pool, the points that they have. And I already can hear some of you going, but that's mathematics. I'm going to address that in a short moment. But they have to keep track of the pool points. They have to decide when to use them, because the way it would work is every time you try to perform an action, whether that's a combat action, whether it's a skill action, whether it's a social action, whenever the character is trying to perform an action, they have to use an action point to do so. They know they're going to succeed. So if they are driving a vehicle and they say, okay, well, I'm going to try and ramp this vehicle over the side of the building and land on the other building 10 meters away. Okay, that will take one action point. It actually won't, but in this particular example, consider that it would. That'll take an action point. You simply chalk off an action point. Your car sails through the air, you launch over the cliff, over the gap, and you land on the roof on the other side, safe and sound. It's very cinematic. It's very simple, but there was a decision to spend the action point. There was the decision to make sure that they had the skill to do that. And there was the creative narrative decision, which as far as I'm concerned is the most important one, to actually try and jump the car off of the roof and land on another roof. So that pool then started to become the sole point of the mechanics of the game. Every time a character does something, the pool gets less. When the pool reaches 0, that's when the character is now completely fatigued, and if they have to spend an additional action point for whatever reason, they fall unconscious if they're on 0. And that wrapped up the whole thing for me. Once I had those two components, I had the skills and I had the action points which controlled life and death, but also controlled the skills, that simple mechanic of the action pool became the core of the game. And that's really what for me was the epiphany moment. It was like, okay, boom, this is it. This is how it's going to play out. So once you have your action point pool, to then restore it is simple enough. You sleep. Or you have someone do a medicine skill check. Can they do it? Yes, they can. There's no uncertainty that the doctor won't be able to help you recover and rest, because the doctor is trained in that skill. It's as simple as that. So then you get your action points back at the end of the evening, and then you have another day to work through your action points. Combat became equally as simple once I had this action point idea. If you have ranged combat, you can fire a rifle and you can hit your target. Your target has the choice, if they decide to act first, which requires an action point, to dodge, if they choose to spend an action point, and they don't want to do anything else for that particular round. Again, all the decision-making process. All the decision-making that the player has to make. This is important. So they choose to dodge, it costs them an action point. If they don't choose to dodge, then the weapon, the type of attack, and again, it's broken into 4 categories. There's punching, which is 1 action point. There's knives and swords and axes, 2 action points. There is martial arts. Knives, swords, and axes is 3 action points. Martial arts, 2 action points. And then ranged weaponry like blasters or phasers or whatever, 3 action points. That's it. And then the Starship. Starship weaponry does 5 action points. If you get hit by a Starship, you're going to feel it. So there we go. You lose action points based on the amount of damage, based on the weapon category, not on other multipliers, not on other factors. It's straight up, that's the way it works. Obviously, the more complex the system needs to be, the more complex your rule system needs to be. So you need to add in, well, if it's this type of armor, it's going to protect against that type of attack. If it's scale mail, it's going to protect better against this than if it's plate mail, which will protect better against that. You can complexify the entire process as much as you like. It's your system. For my system, I had to remove complexity. I had to go, well, we're going to be talking about wearing armor. What is the simplest solution to armor usage so that the players go, oh, I've got armor. Right, chalk off 1 point or the incoming damage. Next round, the armor doesn't count and move on. Then you need a setting. And I did a poll. That's the benefit of having a YouTube channel. I wanted to know how many people wanted to play what type of system. And they all decided bounty hunters in space, which was phenomenal. And by the way, when you're running a poll, you control the choices on that poll. So indirectly, you are manipulating the voting towards something that you want to do. And why not? There's no point in writing a role-playing system set in the Legend of Zelda world, because A, it's copyright violation, but B, I have nothing and I know nothing about that world. So I wouldn't be able to write a really good role-playing system around that. So they chose Bounty Hunters in Space. So it's a science fiction game. So what that leads you on to next, of course, is Starships. I hate, or not hate, let me rephrase. I always examine role-playing rules that come out and go, how does this fit in comparison to Starship Combat? If it's a science fiction game and it doesn't have rules for Starship Combat, I'm not interested. Science fiction, as far as I'm concerned, one of the fundamentals is starships. Now, yes, your characters could just be, participants in the background. That's boring. I have spent many, many years writing rules on how to make ship combat, whether it's sailing ships or starships, interesting for all of the players. They all have to have tension and they all have to have decision-making processes. The moment the player is not making a decision because they're on board the ship and they're going, oh, well, I don't know anything about sailing, so I'm just going to sit here and I can't do anything, that you have it removed tension. They don't care. They can't influence the outcome of the situation. And B, they're not making any decisions. They are literally not making any decisions because the rules prevent them from doing so. So I needed to make sure that the Starship combat rules allowed for everybody to do everything. And so, yes, I fell back on some rules that I came up with for the Nautical Campaign rulebook, which I wrote, which is for 5th edition. But I went, well, the idea of having crew roles and responsibilities and those giving certain powers or skills in the context of this game makes more sense. So that's what I then did. And worked out the Starship combat, again, based on the action points. So the starships have action points for the various components that they have, and when those components are reduced to 0 action points, they're destroyed. It gives you some interesting mechanics where your engineer can shunt action points from one system component to another system component. You can transfer life support into sensors or here and there, and there are all kinds of effects that go on with that. Finally, before I wrap up, character creation for me is always a major bugbear, as a matter of fact. As a GM, I get tired of having players arrive at my table, and I have spent days preparing campaign, maps, making NPCs, working out adventures, working out all this kind of stuff. And then the player sits down at my table and I say, okay, tell me about your character. And they go, she's a barbarian fighter. Okay. What about their backstory? No, I don't do backstories. No, I'm not creative. I'm not imaginative. No, let's just play. That's not part of the deal, in my opinion. So all of the rule systems that I write, the Try system last year and this year with Bounty Hunters, TTRPG, that's the official name, by the way, because it's Bounty Hunters in Space. I was like, well, let's just call it what it is. The character creation process for me is critical. And I have spoken to lots of players and I have said, what is it that prevents you from writing a backstory? Give me the single excuse that you have. Oh, I'm not imaginative. Yeah, all right, okay, I can't fight that. Because if you have been watching this channel now for the, 5 years it's been going, the very first episode was on how to develop your imagination. So if you don't have your imagination by now, personally I think it's confidence in having the ability to create stuff, and the patience to do it and to practice doing it. But anyway, whatever, that's nonetheless, in Bounty Hunter TTRPG, I came up with a character creation process whereby it's not new, it's not novel. There are a couple other systems out there that do this. It walks you through. Where were you born? What type of early upbringing did you have? What was your education? What was your first occupation? In my case, it's then, why did you become a bounty hunter? So it's asking relevant questions. But again, I was like, yeah, but if I'm just asking these questions, A, the book is only then 5 pages long. Not that that's a problem. But fundamentally, the problem that comes in is that the players can still say, oh, I'm just not creative. I'm just not imaginative. And I hate that. Absolutely hate that. So how do I fix that? Well, each of the questions then presents about, I think it's 6 to 10 options for the player. So, for example, birthright, where were you born? There's an option for a poor family, born into a middling family, born into a rich family, a natural family, a scholastic family, a military family, a religious family, or the firm favorite, I'm an orphan. But each of those is then linked to a certain set of skills that you will now get access to, and each of them comes with a little paragraph that you copy and paste into your character sheet that then generates a backstory. For example, if we choose a rich family, the little paragraph that you would copy says, naturally I was born into a rich household. I didn't want for anything. Well, except for real friends. I only had to ask, and, you know, I got whatever I wanted. Life was good. I mean, it was good. I think my closest friend really was one of the servants. And then it says insert name. So all you have to do to create that backstory is insert one name. And then I added in a random name generator as well because, well, people just, they need certain things. So your backstory is built up over the course of your character development. You are adding in a few random names, and by the end of it, you have all of your skills, you have your character, you have your backstory. You're pretty much good to go. So that is the game that I came up with. It takes 30 minutes to explain. The actual rules take less time than that because I was explaining why I came up with the rules. But that in a nutshell is where I kind of came from and what I was thinking in terms of how this whole thing should work. And having played it now a couple times, having had people read through the rules, they're all very impressed. This is not a role-playing system that is going to let you role-play for 100 adventures. I don't think. There is a leveling system in there. It's called your reputation system because it's bounty hunter based. So after a certain number of successful bounties, you go up in rank, or you go up in the prestige of the bounty hunter society. Your reputation increases. You gain more skills and action points and that sort of thing. But I would say that you would play this with a group of people who are much more narrative, theatrical, cinematic based. Those who are numerical based, those who are looking for the little, if I take this trait, I get to do this, and I get to do this, and I tweak that, and suddenly I have this character who can do anything. This is not the game for them. It's not that complex. It was for me, though, an incredible journey in terms of trying to keep things simple and going, well, as a role player of 20 years, this is secondhand nature to me. I don't need to expand upon this. As of this video, my developmental editor is working on the rules, and they've never played role-playing games before. They don't know anything about role-playing game, and I specifically chose them for that reason. And, of course, you know, the reasons of love and all that sort of thing as well. But, you know, that's an aside. They're going through the rule book now going, I don't understand this. I don't understand that. What does this mean? What does that mean? When you just talk about this or that, what does that actually mean from a role-playing perspective? And it's that information, that feedback, which will then just make sure that this game fits right where it should be, which is for new players who want to just have a great role-playing experience. If you're writing a role-playing system, or if you are designing a role-playing system, I would strongly suggest you join our Discord server. That's discord.gg/greatgm. Join us. There are channels within this or the server that I promise you will find great value in terms of getting feedback and all that kind of stuff. Anyway, sponsor time. This week's sponsor is World Anvil. Now, World Anvil has been with the channel for a long time. We absolutely adore and love the work that they do. Why World Anvil for this particular video? Well, World Anvil is particularly good at creating settings. And you cannot create a TTRPG, in my opinion, and I'm sure there's lots of people going to send me emails now where they have, you cannot create a role-playing system that doesn't have a setting. You can try, but ultimately, I cannot see any way in which you could create a role-playing setting that is not a role-playing system that is not linked to a setting. So my own setting, it's science fiction because, well, I ran a popular poll on what people wanted as a setting. I was torn myself between dinosaurs, Greek myth, and bounty hunters in space, and everyone voted for bounty hunters in space. I don't have a problem with this. All of my world information, my setting information, will be housed on World Anvil because, well, that's where it should be. That they will keep track of everything. They will keep all my notes in place. They will prompt me to develop and create new and interesting things that go on within that world setting. So it's all going to be based in World Anvil. Now, if you use the code GreatGM, link down below, or you'll see it here on the screen, GreatGM, you will get a 20% discount on your subscription to World Anvil. Now, it's more than just a world aggregator. Your PCs can log their characters on World Anvil, keep track of their characters, do character posts, keep track of their journey on the maps that can be imported. They can do all kinds of wonderful things. Trust me, you are going to want to check them out if you are looking for something that will bring your group together and your world into one place. worldanvil.com. Thank you for sponsoring today's video. Thank you for watching all the way through today's video. And hopefully your own TTRPG aspirations have been ignited, because the more TTRPGs we have out there, well, the better. The more we can share and learn and get inspired by each other. Until next time, however, I wish you and yours the very happiest of gaming.